And the little girl said to his mother, "Mummy, was that policeman ever a baby?" And the mother said, "Yes." She said, "You know, I've never seen a baby policeman." Apropos of neurotics, there was a mother who brought her child to a psychiatrist. And she said, "I don't know why he's insecure. Everyone else in the neighborhood is." Which brings up the question, are we more neurotic on these days? Now, there are two answers. We're going to consider both. One answer is, well, we're not more neurotic. There have always been both psychotics and neurotics. Take, for example, very famous people have done queer things. The poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, for example, had a passion for building paper boats. He would float them in the bathtub. And one day he didn't have any paper, and he made a boat out of a 50-pound bill. Spinoza, the philosopher, you know what he was fond of doing? He was fond of catching spiders and matching them one against another and watching them fight. Petavius used to get up from his chair at the end of every second hour of work and spin it around 10 times, then sit down and work for another 2 hours. But those who hold that we are not more neurotic today than before use such arguments as these. First of all, in 1853, there was a work, just think, 1853, a work published, The Great Disease of Our Times, Neuroses, work by Weinecke. The University of Tübingen in Germany made a study of neuroses and came to the conclusion that we are not more neurotic. It is only the symptoms that have changed. Now, suppose we take this position and analyze it. Have the symptoms of neuroses changed? But as far as quantity is concerned, there are no more neuroses. It is possible. What was the great difference between the old neuroses, previous days, and our very modern ones? The difference was this, that in all the years I've been on television, for example, I've never found a neurotic angel. They're always normal. And my present angel, named after an Old Testament character, Eli, is just about as normal as blueberry pie. Well, here's the difference between the old neuroses and the new, indicating a change of symptoms. The old neuroses were of the moral order. That is to say, people became neurotic because they became disordered in their relationship either to God, to their neighbor, or to themselves. That, for example, was the problem with the prodigal son. See, he broke this threefold bond. He left the father's house. He became alienated from neighbor because he cleaved to a citizen of the foreign country and became a feeder of swine. And then finally, he was alienated from himself because when he finally did return, it was because he entered into himself. So in these days, men became neurotic because of a sense of guilt. They broke a bond with love. And that's the right understanding of guilt, normal guilt. Hurting someone that you love. That's the meaning of a crucifix. There's the picture of someone I love. Now, these were the old symptoms. What are the new symptoms? The new symptoms are either fiscal or physical. That is to say, people today become neurotic not because they break a relationship with divine love and with neighbor and with themselves. They become neurotic either on account of money or on account of health. Think of how many people today have neuroses simply because they've lost money, they're afraid of losing it, or they're not able to keep up with the Joneses. The history of America could be written in terms of money, our recessions, our depressions, and our panics. Recession is where you tighten your belt. A depression is where you have no belt. And a panic is where you have no pants. So modern neuroses are born of money. And also fear of losing health. You see, the great dread that anyone has that produces a neurosis all depends upon what they fear losing. Here it was relationship with love. Here one of these two. Just think of the commercials, for example. Think of how neurotic we're becoming when, for example, here is a boy who, a young man whose hair is a bit unruly. He can't find a girl. And suddenly, out of nowhere comes a faceless man who hands him a tube. He gets his oil changed. He puts it on his hair. Glory be to God, there are about 20 girls around all of a sudden. You know, you just think of a man going crazy because he lacks oil in his hair. And then bad breath. Oh. The neuroses that are induced. There are meetings in offices. Will we tell Mary? Shall we tell John? I don't think I've got the courage to tell him. And then they meet even, goodness gracious, even football players. Great big men, you'd think they shouldn't worry about bad breath. Here they all meet you. I wonder if we should tell our coach. These big cowards weighing 300 pounds, I'm afraid to tell him he's got bad breath. And the man with bad breath comes in. He's got a bottle of hope in his hand. He's healthy. He's not neurotic. And then hands. Oh. Poor wife who's lost the love of the husband. He touched her hand last night. It was scaly. She calls in the neighbors. She's losing her husband's love. Scaly hands. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there comes a bottle. What does she do now to cure herself? What's the cure of this neurosis? Wash dishes. She puts a few drops of this magic fluid in the dishes, and lo and behold, her husband and the wife are reunited. Why do we have to have divorces in the United States when all we could do is get new soap? Well, that's the difference between the old and new neuroses. And so this is the answer to one question. Namely, are we more neurotic? Many say, no, we are not, only the symptoms have changed. Now, that could very well be. But let's take the other position. Then you can decide for yourselves when we've given both arguments. The other argument is that we are much more neurotic on account of an entirely different philosophy of life. Now, this philosophy of life is not often expressed. It's just hidden in what you read and what many young people do. But I'm going to write out the two propositions of this philosophy of life. The first proposition is every experience is valid. That's the first proposition. Namely, anything that gives pleasure is right. You're never concerned about what anyone outside of that experience thinks. Society, moral order, parents. No. Experience of pleasure is judged of and by itself. Hence, get all the kicks you can out of life. It's the kick that matters, nothing else. Breaking school windows, all right, you get a kick out of it. Well, are there any differences between experiences of pleasure? Yes, there are, and that brings us to the second principle. And the second principle is the more intense the pleasure or the experience, the more it is valid. For example, drugs, speeding. One is not going anywhere, but the faster you drive, the greater is your pleasure. And hence one looks for a new and deeper kind of experience, whatever it may happen to be. Now, are these principles valid? They're not. They're producing a tremendous amount of neurotics. Did you know, for example, that 25% of the clinical cases in psychiatric hospitals in the United States are cases of adolescents? Adolescents who have started with this philosophy. Now, let us judge it. What does it mean when we say that every experience is valid of and by itself? It means that there is not to be an object to judge the experience. Now, normally we have, in making any judgment, we have what? We have a subject, we have an object, and we have the relationship between the two, which is the judgment. For example, suppose I say that this blackboard here is 3.5 feet tall. I, the subject, make a judgment, and I have an experience of height. But how do I judge it? I judge it by an object. All of our experiences as rational beings are to be determined by objects. For example, now, I have a clock up there on top of the camera. The clock says I have 10 minutes yet to talk. Well, I can't simply say, well, I've got 15 minutes to talk and pay no attention to the clock. My experience of talking to you is judged by that object. Space is measured by it. This is one of the reasons this dropping of the object is incidentally the essence of decadence. Any civilization begins to decay when the subject alone is all important. The great I, Well, I decide it's right. I decide it's good. Therefore it is. Modern painting is often without an object. You can't tell whether it's a drunken man going up stairs or stairs going up a drunken man. Now, for example, just 3 weeks ago in the White House, they discovered a painting hanging upside down. Imagine in the White House. How did they know it was upside down? By the signature. But listen, that needn't be the telltale, because maybe the artist subjectively said, listen, I feel better painting this on my head. Look at the twisted ironworks that we have on Park Avenue. Some of our entrances to buildings. They tell absolutely nothing. This is a world of subjects. You can get out of it anything that you please. So our civilization decays when we drop standards, goals, objects, purposes, and destinies. And that's what we Americans have to watch. And is it always the intensity of the experience that makes it all the more valid? When, for example, this mother in one of our western states cut up her baby with broken bottles, was she justified in it? It was an intense experience. Was Madame Koch of Germany, who made lampshades out of the skin of the Jews that were thrown into furnaces? Was that right or was it wrong? And if you say that you may judge without an object or without a standard, then how will you ever condemn Hitler? Boy mugs an old woman, 84 years old. You got a kick out of it. Is that the standard? Is that the judgment? Suppose a waitress brings in a couple of eggs to these people who hold that experience alone is valid. One of the eggs is good, the other is bad. Why does he say that egg is bad? If he says the egg is bad, he's judging by the standard outside of himself, by the object. Why did he order eggs in the first place? And the waitress might say to him, if he was judging everything subjectively, well, if it tastes bad to you, hand it over to him because he's got a good taste. I remember once I went into a restaurant and I asked for some toast, a cup of coffee, an egg, and a few kind words. And the waiter brought me back toast, coffee, the egg, and the check. I said, haven't you got a few kind words? She said, don't eat the egg. So, there are those, therefore, that would also hold that neuroses are increasing, and I believe that. And I believe it on account of this false philosophy which is taking over our nation. That every experience of every individual is right, without any relation to a goal or a purpose. If you want a real good philosophy along these lines, read Viktor, V-I-K-T-O-R, Viktor Frankl. F-R-A-N-K-L, a Jewish psychiatrist of the University of Vienna, who has given us psychology called logotherapy, L-O-G-O, T-H-E-R-A-P-Y. Anything of his is worth reading. Man who went through concentration camps, suffered under the Nazis, suffered under the communists. And he came out of it all saying that he survived simply because he realized that life had a meaning. He told me not very long ago, when I had dinner with him, that when the Nazis began their persecution, he had an opportunity to come to the United States to start his new school of psychology and psychiatry, logotherapy. He wanted to do it. He had the passport. But his father was living. And he was sure that the Nazis would begin an intense persecution. Dr. Frankel said he went to the Church of St. Stephen's in Vienna, knelt down for an hour. He prayed for wisdom. What should he do? Should he go to America? Or should he stay with his father? Watch his father maybe undergo the Nazi persecution and watch himself go through it as well. He came back to the house without a clear answer, but as he sat down to table with his father, he said to his father, "What is that over there on that other table?" The father said, "A piece of marble. I picked it up today at the synagogue. Remember? Remember the synagogue that Hitler burned? Our synagogue? Well, I went over there and I rummaged among the dust and the ashes and the burnt embers, and I found this broken piece of marble." Viktor Frankl said to his father, "Did you ever try to figure out what it was?" "No," he said, "I haven't." Well, he said, "Let's look at it." It was in Hebrew. First three letters of one of the commandments. The fourth. Thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. That was the answer Viktor Frankl wanted. And that night he had a dream. In that dream he saw tens of thousands of his fellow Jews going into laboratories and into furnaces to be burned, and he willed to stay. And he came out normal, and he said everybody else that was in prison with him that had an object. Very base of the Pyrenees. You've heard about it. It was in a movie, The Song of Bernadette. The city of Lourdes. In that particular city in the year 1858, which was very important because 6 months in either direction of that year, our modern world to some extent was born. Darwin wrote his Origin of Species. Mill wrote his Essay on Liberty. Karl Marx, the founder of communism, wrote the introduction to the Critique of Political Economy. And then another world broke onto this. And there appeared to a little girl by the name of Bernadette, the Blessed Virgin at Lourdes. Well, obviously there has to be some verification. Because if there is none, well then what's to prevent any psychotic or dreamer coming along and saying God or an angel appeared to me? So they investigated Bernadette. She was found to be very humble. That's one of the conditions. I know one investigation that stopped very quickly when this person claimed that God had appeared to her, and the investigating committee said, "Are you the saint?" And she said, "Yes, I'm the saint." That ended it. And then in addition to that, there had to be other tests made that were scientifically verifiable, such as miracles. And there is established at Lourdes the International Medical Association, which is made up of some of the very best doctors of the world. I'm not going to give you any of the verification tonight, just simply state that in 1902, Dr. Alexis Carrel went there, and he said he went there as a skeptic. And after studying the miracles, he was absolutely convinced that they took place. And then with this further remark, we'll go into the stories about being broke You see, if Christ is not the Son of God, which is untrue, but if Christ is not the Son of God, then the story of the mother of Christ appearing in this world would be just as ridiculous as the mother of Buddha or Confucius appearing. But if he is the Son of God, then she could just as well appear to intercede for a miracle, to intercede for us just as she did at Cana. And those who accept the background of Lord, well, they have two mothers, like I have two mothers. I have a mother in the flesh, and then I have her as a spiritual mother, because our blessed Lord gave her to us all on the cross when he said, "Behold thy mother." I read Mass once a week to her. When I was a little baby, my mother placed me on the altar of the Blessed Mother and dedicated me to her. So I've dedicated all of my books to her. Everything that has been written my whole life. Well, I love the place, and not just that place, but let me tell you that it's a good city in which to be broke. Now, you can be broke financially, you can be broke spiritually, you can be broke physically. Physically broken, you might be cared for by a miracle. I'm not going to discuss those. But financially broke, that will interest many of you. I have already told you that I was in school until I was 29. That's how dumb I was. And I was doing university work at the University of Louvain in Belgium, and I wished to celebrate the 5th anniversary of my ordination as a priest, and I thought the best way to celebrate it was to go to Lourdes, which is about 16 or 18 hours away from Louvain in Belgium, all the way down almost to the border of Spain. Well, I had just enough money to go to Lourdes, but not enough to live on once I arrived. I asked my brother, who was studying medicine at the University of Louvain, if he had any money. And he was a typical university student, too. So I said, well, if I have faith enough to go down to Lourdes to celebrate the 5th anniversary of my ordination, it's up to the Blessed Mother to get me out. So I arrived in Lourdes broke. I then decided that if she was going to pay my hotel bill, she could just as well pay a big one as a little one. When you're asking for miracles, never be a piker. Well, no drinks sold so far in Wilkes-Barre. We've just received a telegram. He was a lone drinker. They took in only a dime. You notice that? Well, the first-class hotel in Lourdes would be 4th class here in New York City. But at any rate, it was first class there. So I decided to make a novena of prayer, that is to say, 9 days. The 5th day, I received my bill. It was positively staggering. I had visions of French jails and gendarmes and American consuls, but I stuck it out for 4 more days. So the 9th morning came, and I was very hopeful. I went down to the grotto, nothing happened. Noon, nothing happened. Evening, nothing happened. Then it was serious. So I decided to give the Blessed Mother another chance. So I went down to the grotto about 10 or half past 10 that night, and as I was kneeling there, a portly gentleman tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Are you an American priest?" "Yes." "Do you speak French?" "Yes." "Do you know Paris?" "Yes." "Well," he said, "this is my wife, my son, my daughter. We're going to Paris tomorrow. We want you to come with us to Paris and talk French for us and show us about the city." So he walked me back to the hotel, and then he asked me a very interesting question. He said, "Have you paid your hotel bill?" So was I glad I hadn't paid it. So I out-fumbled him for the bill. One of those not too rare moments in life when the grasp does not exceed the reach. So I went to Paris with him and stayed a week, and at the end of the week he said, do you mind taking my address at the bottom of a check? You can visit us when you return to New York. And I said, well, no, not particularly. So I arrived back in Louvain with much more than I started with. And that family and I went back to Lourdes 3 times together to thank Our Lady for introducing us one to another. Now, the moral is not to go to the Waldorf and run up a bill. But it works in Lourdes, and so I found it was a very good city in which to be broke. And not only to be broke physically, I mean financially, but also to be broke financially and spiritually, rather. And this happened on another occasion. I've been to Lourdes 26 times. In this particular time, I wanted a spiritual favor. Would not have profited me in the least. And when I left, it was not forthcoming. So I was making my thanksgiving after Mass. It was my last day. And I was talking to the Blessed Mother, and this is what I was saying to her. I said, now listen, I have come over 3,000 miles here to visit you, and I asked for a spiritual favor. Didn't mean anything to me, and you refused to grant it. Now you can keep it. I don't want it. I said, if you ask me for something, I do give you anything you wanted. Why don't you give something to me? I'm mad at you. Now I said, it's all right for me to be mad at you, but I don't want you to be mad at me. So I'm going to give you a chance to prove that you're not mad at me. So I said, I'm going down to the grotto, take a drink of the water, and then I'm going to leave the grounds. And before I leave the grounds, I want you to send me a little girl, aged 12, dressed in white, who will hand me a white rose. And I shall take that as a sign that you're at least not mad at me. I knew she had 1,000 reasons to be mad at me, but I didn't want her to be. So I was about 75 feet from the gate. I didn't see anybody there. And I said, well, you better hurry. You haven't much time. So I got to the gate, and right behind it was a little girl, aged 12, dressed in white, and she handed me a white rose. I suppose that's why I'm talking about her tonight. It reminded me of a line of Chesterton's. That her son climbed up her body as a tower of ivory and kissed upon her lips a mystic rose. And that's what she gave me. Then one other experience has to do with being spiritually broke, for I was broken in this instance. I had been there about 7 or 8 days. And the train left for Paris at 8 o'clock in the evening. And I went down to the grotto about 7, just to say a little farewell. And I ended up with this little prayer. I said, I want you to send me some trouble, some inconvenience, something that will be very hard for me, and because of it, somebody else will be helped very, very much. Now let me tell you, that's one prayer that's always answered. That never fails. Because sometimes, you know, when we're young, our mothers give us bitter medicine, and they say it's, well, for your own good. Sometimes the bitter medicine, too, can be for other people's good. And she gives bitter medicine from time to time. I can remember over a period of a couple of years that I seemed to get every hard cross always on her feast day. Never it was. But, so after making that prayer, I hurried back to the best hotel in Lourdes. I always stay there since. And I ran up, as is my wont. I ran up the stairs 2 flights at a time. First flight, I got the impression somebody was following me. Second flight, somebody following me. Third flight, ran down the corridor, somebody was after me. Turned around, there was a young woman there from Holland. I said, "Are you following me?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Why?" She said, "I don't know." She said, "I saw you in procession this afternoon, and I just decided that I wanted to talk to you." I said, "Anything I can do for you?" She said, "No, I'm an atheist." I said, "Oh, no, you're not an atheist. You wouldn't be here if you were an atheist." I said, "You probably lost the faith," and she said, "Yes." I said, "You're my trouble." So I canceled my trip back to Paris, and I stayed on for 3 days until finally she was at peace with herself and the good Lord. And up to this time, I had no difficulty. And I started back to Paris. 50 miles, and it was 8 or 9 hours to Paris. 50 miles, the conductor put me off. He said, "Your ticket is no good. It's 3 days old." Waited for another train, bought another ticket. Got on a train, no water to drink, no food. It took me 2 days to get, 2 days and 2 nights to get to Paris, during which time I had neither food nor drink. I had plenty of trouble. But it helped someone. And then this very interesting story. At the close of the last century, there was married in Paris a good, ordinarily good girl by the name of Elizabeth Arrighi to a French doctor who was in the government service, Felix Le Sueur. And he promised to respect the faith of his wife, but he spent almost as much time propagating atheism and anti-clericalism as he did practicing medicine. As a matter of fact, he was editor of one of the anti-clerical newspapers in Paris. And he forgot the promise that he made to his wife and tried to break down her faith. And he was succeeding fairly well. But he worked a little bit too fast. When he put a certain book of an arch scoffer into her hands, she reacted. She decided to study her faith. Now, she was a learned woman. She could speak, besides her native language of French, she could speak English, German, Italian, Spanish, Russian, Latin, and knew some Greek. She also knew some Greek. And she built a library in her side of the house, conspicuous with the great classical thinkers like Aquinas and Bonaventure. And then in 1905, she was taken ill. And she tossed on a bed of constant pain from 1905 until 1914, May 3rd. And as she was dying, she said to her husband, "Felix, when I am dead, you will become a Dominican priest. He said, "Elizabeth, you know my sentiments. I've sworn hatred of God and religion. I shall live in that hatred, and I shall die in it." She repeated her words and passed away. Rummaging through her papers, he found her last will and testament. And it read, I will to you the most precious thing that any wife can will a husband. I will to you 9 years of suffering. In 1905, I asked Almighty God to send me sufficient pains and sufferings to purchase your soul. Prayer alone was not enough. And on the day that I die, you will have been bought and paid for. Greater love than this no woman hath, that she should lay down her life for her husband. He dismissed it as the fancies of a pious woman, but inasmuch as he was very devoted to her, and to forget his sorrows, he took an automobile trip in the southern part of France with an atheistic friend of his. And they made the same trip that he and his wife had made during their honeymoon. Just for sentimental reasons, he stopped in front of a little church into which he had gone to visit during the honeymoon. And he almost seemed to hear his wife speaking to him, saying, go to Lourdes. Well, he had been to Lourdes, he had written about it, he had proven that Lourdes was a fraud and a superstition. So he dismissed the thought. And then in August 1914 came the World War. Dr. Lasserre was charged by the French government to take important documents to Bordeaux. And seated on the box of documents in the long corridor of the French train, for the second time the message, seemingly from his wife, go to Lourdes, go to Lourdes. He compromised and went to Paris-le-Monial. Third time the message, and he went to Lourdes. Rank unbeliever. Standing before the statue of Our Lady, suddenly he received the gift of faith. So total and complete was it that he had not to go through any process of juxtaposition and say, well, now that I believe, how will I answer this difficulty, or how will I answer that difficulty? He saw all of error in its stupidity, naked stupidity. Well, the conversion of Dr. Lasserre was about as exciting as the news of the bombardment of Rheims. He went to Rome in company with Father Jambier, the orator of Notre Dame, and audience with Benedict XV. Dr. Lasserre said to His Holiness, I intend to become a Dominican priest. Holy Father said, I forbid you. You must remain in the world and repair the harm which you have done. Benedict XV then spoke a few words to Father Jambier, and then turning to Dr. Lasserre said, I revoke my decision.